Hello, pilgrims. Welcome to another quote and meditation on that quote. I warn you in advance, this one's going to be kind of long, but if you get something out of it and you like it, please click the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, and I'd love to hear your comments if you care to leave them. Today I'm going to quote from, well, one of my favorite books of all time, The Sickness Unto Death by Soren Kierkegaard. I guess I should show you how crazy it is. I love this book so much. I don't know if you can see all the underlining and the handwriting in the corner. Look at this. All the handwriting, the underlining, page after page after page. I have filled this thing with notes, highlights, underlining. I mean, it's crazy. It's one of those books that I shouldn't have even bothered. I might as well just underline everything in the book. Kierkegaard believed that to be a person, a human self, requires a constant negotiation between various pairs of opposites. One of those is the opposition between the finite and the infinite. So humans are finite, obviously, in those aspects where our existence is limited by time and space. Right, so I mean, I'm finite, for example, because I have a body and I can only be here and not there at the same time. But I also have an infinite aspect to myself in the sense that in my imagination, I'm completely unlimited, right? And the successful integration of these two aspects of our existence is absolutely necessary if one is to develop the fullness of one's potential as a healthy human self. The problem is that we often err on the side of one or the other of these oppositions. So, for example, you could downplay the infinite aspect of yourself, maybe because you're scared of it, because it opens up a world of imaginative possibilities that may overwhelm you or maybe make you feel unmoored or ungrounded. But in that case, you could become too earthbound, burdened by the heaviness of your worldly fate. But you could also err on the other side. And that's what happens when you live so much in the infinite aspect of yourself that you end up in denial about the reality of yourself in the here and now, and you live in fantasy, which is a very different thing from living out of your true possibilities. So in the quote that I'm going to read, Kierkegaard is talking specifically about how living in the fantastic cuts a person off from their own self. And he says that this can happen at three different levels. First of all, it can happen at the level of feeling. It can also happen at the level of intellectual knowledge. And it can happen at the level of the will, where we make decisions and where we commit ourselves to goals. All three of these can be subject to becoming too infinitized. So anyway, here's the quote. I'm going to leave the male language as it is. It's from the 19th century. So I hope that doesn't get in the way of your appropriating the content for yourself. Obviously, we could say she as well as he. Here's the quote. The fantastic is that which leads a person out into the infinite in such a way that it only leads him away from himself and thereby prevents him from coming back to himself. When feeling becomes fantastic in this way, the self becomes only more and more volatilized. Love that image of being turned into vapor, like water, like yourself is water in a pot boiling, turning to steam and boiling away. He says when feelings become fantastic in this way, the self becomes only more and more volatilized, and finally comes to be a kind of abstract sentimentality. So also with knowing, when it becomes fantastic, the law for the development of the self with respect to knowing is that the increase of knowledge should correspond to the increase of self-knowledge. That the more the self knows, the more it knows itself. If this does not happen, the more knowledge increases, the more it becomes a kind of inhuman knowledge, in the obtaining of which a person's self is squandered. The self is likewise gradually volatilized when willing becomes fantastic. In that case, willing does not become proportionally as concrete as it is abstract. What should be the case is that the more infinite it becomes in purpose and determination, the more personally present and contemporary it becomes in the smallest part of the task that can be carried out at once, so that in being infinitized, it comes back to itself in the most rigorous sense, so that when furthest away from itself, it is simultaneously and personally closest to carrying out the infinitely small part of the work that can be accomplished this very day, this very hour, this very moment. When feeling, knowing, or willing has become fantastic, the entire self can eventually become that. And then my favorite part. But to become fantastic in this way, and thus to be in despair, does not mean that a person cannot go on living fairly well, be occupied with temporal matters, marry, have children, be honored and esteemed. And it may not be detected that in a deeper sense the person lacks a self. Such things do not create much of a stir in the world, for a self is the last thing the world cares about, and the most dangerous thing of all for a person to show signs of having. The greatest hazard of all, losing the self, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. No other loss can occur so quietly. Any other loss, an arm, a leg, $5, is sure to be noticed. I read this, I think, when I was in my early 30s, and I was beginning a process of self-discovery in which I was really beginning to see how disconnected I was to myself and how much myself had become, to use Kierkegaard's term, volatilized in the fantastical. As a child, I was physically weak and fragile. I was overwhelmed with fears. I lacked any animal sense of confidence in my body or awareness of my true capacities and potential. And I craved identification with the heroes I saw on television and in the movies. And then I lived and moved and had my being in those movies and in those TV characters. You know, my identification with them came at the expense of making peace with and developing my own true body, soul, and spirit. As Kierkegaard says, it just led me further and further away from myself to the point where it became safer to have feelings watching a movie than in real relationships with real people. Easy for me to get teary-eyed about the general human condition, but impossible for me to maintain a partnership with an actual human being. And always it was easier for me to be in my head, where even the sky imposes no limit, than in my body and my heart, which grounds us. And so my will was very weak. It was easier for me to fantasize about big schemes than to put my nose to the grindstone and actually do the nitty-gritty tasks necessary to make those ideas real. Kierkegaard helped me, particularly in this book, to see the importance of the recursive element, the coming back to oneself always, coming back from intellectual pursuits to apply what I've learned to help me grow as a person, coming back from the big plans to the daily tasks that face me today, coming back from flights of fantasy and generalized sentiments to the reality of my own relationship with myself and with the human beings immediately present to me, the people I actually have to learn to get along with. Feeling, knowing, willing. All of these must contain that recursive coming back. Otherwise, I become way too infinitized, too fantastical, and not at all grounded. I hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it. Next time, we're going to look at the opposite side of this error, when one becomes too finitized. Stay with us.